Last time we looked at the 7 virtues, the cardinal virtues of justice, prudence, temperance, and fortitude, and the theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity. Those things are dispositions towards the good. They draw us closer to our final end, who is God, our summum bonum. Today we're going to take a look at Aquinas' explanation of the 7 deadly sins, or the 7 capital sins, as he calls them. These are habits, when performed over and over, get more difficult to resist each time, and get more easy to do every time, just like a virtue, but in reverse. These are things which destroy, pervert, or take away from our ability to reach our final end, who is God. They disturb our relationship with Him, and hinder our ability to reach Him. So he calls these capital sins because the Latin word caput means head. And these are kind of like the leader or the head sins, which all have, as he calls them, daughters, but they all sort of give rise to other sins that are related to them, that are a little bit more specific. So you'll see these sort of like sub-vices of each of these major 7. I'll try to touch on a few for each one and define them from St. Thomas Aquinas as we go. But let's just briefly get our catechism's insight on the word sin, which has many connotations. The first thing it says in paragraph 1849 is, sin is an offense against reason, truth, and right conscience. That is a great way to open our discussion today, because as we looked at the virtues last time, you'll remember over and over hearing about right reason, and right reason as an objective reality, the way that things are in the world. So if the virtues are conformity to, living within, in harmony with, and becoming an instantiation of right reason, then the vices are exactly the opposite. They are a disturbance of the pattern, a ruining of right reason, an excess or a deficiency, which causes some break in our relationship with God and with each other, and indeed even with ourselves. So let's go into the 7 capital sins as St. Thomas Aquinas defines them. First up, let's talk about greed, which Thomas calls Avaritia. Greed is an inordinate desire for material goods. It could be material wealth, it could be money, or it could be anything that is materially owned. Greed is an excessive or inordinate desire. So a perfect example right off the bat of something that is contrary to reason. The things desired may even be good in and of themselves. Indeed, God didn't make any ungood things, any evil substances. As St. Augustine puts it, greed is not a fault in gold. Gold itself might be good. Fine clothes might be nice. I mean, after all, they're wonderfully crafted. They're artistic. They're beautiful. Perhaps they're even comfortable. But it's an inordinate desiring of those things that turns an ordered desire into the vice of greed. And greed, as you know, in the lives of people around you, or even in your own life, if you've ever experienced any appetite for material things, it continues to increase. You'll notice this in all the vices. They're not satisfied by a single act. The greedy person is not satisfied by gaining the thing that he wants. No, in fact, he often sets his eyes immediately on the next thing that he wants, and then the next. And it becomes for him eventually an unending desire for material wealth. Avarice or greed is contrary to liberality and to charity. Liberality is the openness of to give oneself. And usually liberality refers to one's goods. And so obviously one can't both be liberal and greedy at the same time. The next of the 7 deadly sins that we'll look at luxuria or lust. Often talked about within religious circles, and outside of them, probably the greatest criticism of religious people is their supposed fixation on sexuality. Well, lust is one of the 7 capital sins, and luxuria is a disordered sexual desire. Take note how simple and clean and commonsensical St. Thomas Aquinas' definitions are. If this were any other philosopher, he would write chapters and books even trying to just define these simple words. But Aquinas' definitions are short, sweet, and practically incontestable. Isn't that great? Lust is disordered sexual desire. Notice the word disordered again. So what would lust be? It could be a daughter of lust could be adultery. It could be infidelity. It could be immodesty or seduction. All of these things engender lust and are the products of lustful desires, disordered sexual desires. So again, the thing itself desired is good. And that's important because we get these accusations sometimes in religious circles from atheists that we are quote unquote Victorian. And by that, they refer to a historical era under Queen Victoria where supposedly sexuality was forbidden and it was a major taboo and no one ever talked about it. And it was something you sort of just did for the good of humanity and for the good of England. Whether that's a myth or not, we don't have the time to get into, but this accusation that we're obsessed with sex and that we're terrified of it is really not true, as we saw with St. John Paul II's famous Theology of the Body, and as we have seen indeed in St. Thomas Aquinas. Sexuality itself is good. It's disordered sexual desire that gets us in trouble, right? If I were to lust after a woman, and I am married, if I were to lust after a woman who's not my wife, the problem is not that women are bad. The problem is not that a woman's beauty is bad or dangerous. The problem is that my desire is not ordered to my good or to her good, or indeed to our ultimate good, which is God. If I were to desire, I mean, there are all kinds of perversions which I don't necessarily need to name, but right, like homosexuality is a disordered sexual desire. Because those things don't go together in that way. They don't produce children. They're not the fount of life that an ordinary, ordered sexual desire is supposed to be. So for all the reasons that you've probably already heard in many videos, far more popular than mine, that disordered sexual desire can mean anything that is contrary to right reason. So that's luxuria, that's lust. And you probably don't need me to tell you in 2025 that, like greed, lustful desires are not satisfied. No one ever indulges in the viewing of pornography or something and then afterwards goes, wow, I'm really content. I won't need to do that ever again. Or even I won't need to do that for a while. In fact, addiction to pornography and lust, enslavement to lust, is one of the most deceptive and addicting vices in existence, because immediately while engaging in the vice, the person is not really satisfied by it. And so they're doing something that is inherently shameful and inherently dissatisfying, but which they feel compelled to do. How do I know that? Well, first of all, I'm a man and I've existed on earth. But second of all, you can also find this in the other great doctor of the church that I love, St. Augustine. St. Augustine struggled with lust for a lot of his life. In fact, it was the thing that held him back for a long time from converting to Christianity and from leaping into the faith with all of his heart, even though he knew that it was true. He was getting the sneaking suspicion that it was all true. But he famously prayed, "Oh Lord, give me chastity, but not yet." Because he loved the young lady that he was cohabitating with, that he was sleeping with, and he loved beautiful young women. But he said, "I thought myself free when I did whatever I wanted, but I was like a prisoner running around in the yard of the prison, having gotten out of his cell, but still trapped within the walls, yelling, 'I'm free, I'm free, I'm free.' I was like a madman. I called myself free, but really I was a slave to my lower desires, right, of lust." So every man can sort of vouch for that, probably every woman too, who's experienced the depths of addiction and compulsion to this vice. But rather than use the psychological language of addiction, I prefer the traditional language of vice there. So how about gluttony? Up next. Gula. Gluttony is disordered desire for food and drink. And yes, gluttony is a vice that explicitly addresses only food and drink. So you would only metaphorically ever extend it to anything else, like I'm a glutton for punishment, or I'm gluttonous for good reading, or something like that. I mean, that's only a cute metaphor. But true gluttony is a disordered desire for food and drink. Now, here we get some interesting points in gluttony. How many beers is too many beers? Or how many pieces of chocolate cake is too many pieces of chocolate cake? I'm going to tell you something that I rarely say in moral theology to my students, and the answer is it depends. But it doesn't depend on all sorts of arcane circumstances and pages of excuses. It depends on reason in the situation for that person. So if I'm a 300-pound wrestler or football player, a big-time athlete, I may have to eat a good deal more than a 90-pound high school female student or something like that, right? Why? It's reasonable for me to do so. And I'm not eating purely out of pleasure and purely to satisfy myself, to satisfy my throat, but I'm eating for nutrition. If I'm that big football player, I'm eating to satisfy the needs of my body. That's precisely what food is for. You don't need me or Aquinas to tell you that. Food is for health and the satisfaction of the body. It is not only for pleasure. Pleasure is a byproduct of it, just like these other things, by the way. Material goods are for our good. They're to be stewarded. We all have different amounts of them. They're to be given away liberally, but they're not to be treasured above God. They're not to be desired in a disordered way. The pleasures of sexuality are to be treasured and stewarded well. They are not bad in and of themselves, but disordering them causes this black hole of vice to open up. The same way is true for Gula when it refers to food and drink. For example, there are aspects of temperance that come in here. Sobriety is what St. Thomas Aquinas calls temperance, referring to liquors. So again, like how many beers is too much? Well, hey, I'm sorry to tell you, but there's not going to be like on your third beer, a red light goes off above your head and it's like, okay, one more and you're done, kid. Anything like that. Now, we do get a little bit of guidance from the church on alcohol, which is, to make it short and to use my own words, it's don't get blackout drunk. But basically, if you want a more exact recitation of the catechism on that, it's we are not to drink so much liquor that we are past the point of moral discernment. So if we are not acting on our own, then we have gone way too far. We don't have our inhibitions anymore. And that's precisely why some people drink, of course, to lose all of their inhibitions. And that's precisely what you aren't supposed to do, right? But anyway, this joy that we experience from food is a byproduct and not the main thing that we should focus our attention on, just like in every other good that we're discussing here. Here are some interesting aspects of gluttony you might not have ever heard about. We typically think of gluttony as eating too much, and that's just about it. And let me just point out to you that it's interesting in our culture, in America, where our obesity rate is nearing 40% overall, 40% in America. You probably never hear of gluttony ever. In fact, we have gone full circle and we are now praising people who eat too much, or we call them something else besides gluttons. We call them like people of size or something like that. And we make all kinds of excuses. Well, it's the metabolism, or maybe it's the soy oils in the food, or whatever it is. We make these exceptions for ourselves. And I'm not saying that none of those exceptions don't have validity. First of all, I'm not really credible to say that. I mean, I don't know about soybean oil. Maybe it is really bad for you. But is there a disorder in the amount of food that we eat? Well, go to any other country, eat food there, and come back to the United States and let me know what the portions were like. Because every single time I've done that, I've returned to America and remembered, good grief, our portions are enormous, especially our drink proportions. Like a small is like this big over here. It's really disordered, but we never talk about it. And that's how I think the devil is at work there. So C.S. Lewis writes in the Screwtape Letters, do not underestimate, he's talking to, it's like the advice of a higher demon to a lower demon. He's like, do not underestimate the value of gluttony, even though it's, it's unpopular to speak about. Doesn't mean it's not working against us humans. So gluttony, eating too much, is the obvious species of gluttony that we want to avoid. But there's more to it. Gluttony can also be eating too excitedly. Okay, yeah, we're not supposed to get excited about food. No, you can be excited and happy about it. But have you ever been around someone who's slurping it up so fast that, it's like my mom used to joke and say, look, nobody's going to take it from you. Slow down, take your time, enjoy it. Why is that disordered to eat too excitedly? Well, because somebody put that food together for you. It's a blessing to have that food. And so you're to enjoy the art of it, even if it's very simple, even if it's just boiled cabbage or something. Something is a gift from God and a gift from your host, whoever prepared it for you, or even if you prepared it yourself. We shouldn't slurp it down or act as if it's, like someone's going to steal it. Eating too excitedly, that's one way. Eating too daintily is kind of one that is quite unpopular, especially with students from a very wealthy family. Dainty eating is when you're extremely specific about what you want. Like, oh, I ordered medium and this is like a little bit more medium well. I need you to redo that. Or, this toast is a little bit too crispy. Can you do it less crispy? And of course, a little bit of that is reasonable. And again, we're just operating on right reason and we're trying to match our individual reasoning up with the right reason out there in the universe. But I mean, can it be an offense against the hospitality of the people preparing the food? Absolutely. Have you never been to a restaurant and had that one person right next to you complaining about every little thing? And so it's not just like, hey, I'm paying a lot of money here. I really was excited for this steak. Can we redo it, please? I'm sorry to be a pain. It's, oh, excuse me. This is totally not right. Right. So it's an over pickiness. It's an offense against gratitude and hospitality. So daintily is another one. Anyway, we could talk more about gluttony there, but I've spent a lot of time on it. Anyway, overall, a disordered relationship with food and drink it's plaguing our nation, it's plaguing our culture, our people. I think it's worth remembering gluttony and the responsibility we have for that vice. Actually, we could talk about it from a physiological or a spiritual point of view. Either way, we are both spirit and matter. Our stomachs physically expand every time we overeat. The habit is built up more and more. The second piece of chocolate cake becomes the third piece of chocolate cake, etc. And we've all met people who are addicted to liquors. It's really interesting that in our sort of post-Protestant Christian America, it's easy for us to point out the disorder of overeating, but it's not really easy for us to take responsibility for it. It's sort of like one of those things we can see it in other people, but we don't want to talk about it in ourselves. So something good to remember, even in my own life, that I have to keep thinking about. Anyway, moving on. Ira, wrath. Wrath is unjust or disordered desire for revenge or vengeance. Wrath can take many forms, and it is indeed a habit. If you've ever met anyone who loses their temper habitually, that's what we're talking about, the vice of wrath. Wrath can be getting mad at someone who doesn't deserve it, but it can also be expressing anger or taking vengeance to too excessive a degree. It could also be executing justice in a manner that is contrary to the law, so vigilante justice, or offensive to holy law, to canon law, to God. Anyway, again, we see disorder or inordinate or unreasonable. Anger in and of itself is a passion. So that's actually so important, I might as well write it. Anger is a passion. Passions are what we would abbreviate in English to feelings. Passions are things that we suffer, that come upon us. You might see the similarity to the word passive. So they don't have an immediate moral value on their own. Some people are prone to become very angry very quickly, and some people hardly get angry at all. Neither excess is in and of itself good. Neither excess nor deficiency is in and of itself good. But if you don't get angry about anything ever, Augustine says this, if you don't get angry about anything ever, then you must think that there's no injustice in the world. And that's simply not true. So if there's injustice in the world, if offense does happen, then anger, the passion of anger, is natural. It's a response to that. And it's not in and of itself bad. Similarly to how the material for these other vices is not in and of itself bad. But when expressing itself in a disordered way, when it happens against reason, contrary to reason, then it's obvious that it becomes a problem for us. Now, let me just take a moment here to re-emphasize what against reason might mean. I always use this example. If a student walked into my room and became angry with me for giving homework or something like that and punched me in the face, that would clearly be in excess. And when I say clearly, I'm not giving an opinion. I'm not sort of saying that would make me feel bad, right? It actually would be so in excess that if I did nothing and sort of went, "Ow, that really hurt. Please don't do that again," other students in the room would probably look around and go, "Oh, what? How can you not respond with vengeance or with justice on that? That was an unjust act," right? So there is a balance of reason. If the student, instead of punching me, simply said, "Mr. Hill, we've had a lot of homework in our other classes. This is kind of frustrating," it would be a totally different response, right? That would be an absolutely good thing for them to do. So that's a silly, sort of simple example, but we can all see that the measure of right reason is not a matter of opinion or a matter of cultural consensus, but a matter of conforming ourselves, our reasoning ability, to the order, the reason that God has written into the universe for us. Anyway, let's keep going. Okay. I wrote the Latin first there. Let's do envy, which is Invidia. Invidia, envy. The definition here is so great. Sorrow for another's good. Sorrow for another's good is envy. That definition convicts me a little bit. It makes me realize that although I don't think of myself as an envious person, at times I am. Envy is a sin against charity, which should will the good of the other and rejoice in their happiness, rejoice in their good fortune. But instead, envy is the feeling of sorrow or regret, as if Another's good fortune detracts from you or takes away from you. This becomes a habit of the soul because it forms resentment. It makes people hate because someone else has something that they don't have. And so it becomes this increasing vice that once practiced over and over, if harbored, becomes an entire way of living. In fact, you might argue that much of our market in America, in the West, is based on inspiring envy. The young people now call it FOMO, or they did at one point, fear of missing out. I'm showing my age there, I'm sure. You can go ahead and laugh it up. But isn't that what a lot of commercials and a lot of ad campaigns intend to do? Inspire you with envy for what someone else has. Oh, that's a great car. Man, why don't I have a car like that? Or whatever. And get you to want what they have. And what do you feel after that? Not inspired, not happy and ready to like turn your life around and be like, man, I'm going to go for that. That's so great. Maybe that happens rarely, but often it's more like a sadness. It doesn't have to be like you're crying tears, like that kind of sadness, but sadness that the good is difficult is just the opposite of happiness. Like you're angry about it. You're unhappy about it. You're unhappy about the goodness of others. C.S. Lewis writes, I believe it was in The Abolition of Man, that if you want to know how God wants us to feel about another's good fortune, it's sort of like when you walk up upon a waterfall. You don't say, well, gee, that waterfall is beautiful, therefore I'm not as beautiful as that waterfall. You admire it. You simply admire it and you go, wow, that's really great. So when you see the talents or the good fortune of others, envy is the thing that makes you somehow, in an inordinate way, feel slighted by it. But charity is the thing that would rejoice in it, like the sight of that waterfall, where you'd go, wow, that person is really smart. What a brilliant guy. And just as an observation, take a look at where these vices all lead us. Nobody who is stuck in one or many of these vices leads a life that we can point to and say, wow, that's a really happy person. No one loves lust and just is like, well, I happen to like cards and archery, and also I'm really into lust and like indulging in pornography and adultery and all those sorts of things. No, they're always destructive. They bring despair. They bring us so far away from our final end that the more we continue in them, the more it feels like we can never get out. No different from envy. We have a culture now built on envy, and I would argue built on resentment, the hatred that comes from envy. So anyway, without preaching too much against the culture, here's the next one. Here's another one like gluttony that you probably never hear about. And it's so ironic. It's the devil's footprint of contradiction. We are all leaning towards sloth, culturally speaking. I would say our culture leans into leisure and relaxation and carving out your time and having you time and space for you and all of that, right? We lean so hard into sloth without ever calling it that, right? But St. Thomas Aquinas defines sloth in a way similar to how he defines envy with sadness. He says sloth is sadness that the good is difficult. Sadness that the good is difficult. Isn't that the best definition of sloth you can possibly imagine? A person who is lazy. What really are they? They are unhappy because doing good things is hard. It requires effort. So they're not satisfied. Now, sloth is a vice just like all of these others. Sloth is a capital sin. So being lazy leads to more laziness. And so it might seem like an innocent habit. It might sort of be like, well, I just like to really sleep in and not really do that much. And I'm not railing against relaxation. And I've already made videos about how any hobby can be good, and relaxation, even relaxation of doing nothing, can be healthy in order, right? According to right reason. Outside of order, not according to right reason, it develops into this sadness, this despair. It leads to, in fact, despair. Despair is one of the daughter sins that Aquinas names of sloth. And why don't you take a look at what we now call depression, what we now call profound sadness, mental illness, whatever, anxiety, depression, those things. What's the first sign that someone is entering into those illnesses? It's that their environment around them, sort of like they stop caring about it, right? A messy house, a messy room, a total apathy towards their life starts to develop. It's one of the first things that you can see, right? So sloth is not just a sort of cute, like lazy Saturday morning. It's a developed habit of sadness and reluctance to do what is good because it's hard, because it's difficult. The opposite virtues would be courage, because courage tells us to go out and do the hard thing, even though it's hard, and to take pride in tackling a challenging issue for the good, not for your own pride, as in like the problem of pride, but to take joy in it, to take happiness in it, for going and doing something great. Magnanimity, greatness of soul. That is the opposite of sloth. Now, just if people are technical and they're watching this video, acedia actually refers to spiritual goods especially. St. Thomas has another word. It's otiositas, that is like overdue leisure in like physical work or manual labor. Acedia especially indicates spiritual things that are good. So this is like neglecting prayer, not because you're too tired, or it's just you're not really in the mood, or you haven't had any me time yet today, or it could be not going to mass because you just sort of, I don't know, it's kind of a pain to get there and you got to get the kids in the car and all that. So St. Thomas is thinking of that when he says acedia. And he actually has a slightly separate category, otiositas, for physical or manual laziness. But that is a problem too. That actually is just related to justice. It's an offense against the duties that one has to do. Okay. Anyway, we're getting long now, so I'm going to go to the seventh. At the bottom, at the root of all of these is pride, superbia. Pride is defined by St. Thomas as an undue overestimation of one's own excellence. So there's again that summoning of disorder, unreasonableness, an overestimation of one's own excellence. An obsession with it, right? A fascination with one's own abilities, an overestimation of what you can do, trying to become something higher or better than what you are. Not in a way of like aspiration, like I'd like to improve, but trying to reach out and grasp it, right? Vanity, for example, is a species of pride, is a daughter of pride. Vanitas in Latin means like nothingness, or like wind, something that's not able to be had, something not able to be held. So that's why it often applies to physical beauty, right? Because taking pride in our physical beauty is silly, because it's going away every single day. We're getting less beautiful as we live. Pride is the root of all of these other vices, because the first thing you have to do if you're going to engage in lust, if you're going to commit adultery, or if you're going to envy something else someone else has, you have to, if you're going to do that and you're going to do it knowingly, that is to say on purpose, it's not like an accidental venial sin. If you're going to commit a mortal sin, you've got to first either rebel against God or simply believe that you know what is better for you than what God knows. So those things are acts of pride. So that's why pride is at the root of all of them. There's a great quote about pride. I can't remember. It was one of the Eastern Fathers who said it. Oh, no, it was Augustine, actually. It was Augustine who said, "It is pride who made angels into devils, and humility that makes men like angels." Pretty good quote from St. Augustine there. But pride is at the root of all of them. We all have a little bit of pride. In fact, the moment we think that we're humble is precisely the moment we have to watch out for pride. C.S. Lewis reminds us of that again in the Screwtape Letters. So anyhow, let's just conclude with an overall view of what we've got so far and what this means for us. The capital sins all give birth to smaller sins. They all get more specific as they go down, but they are sort of like branches on a tree that, they start out thick and big and scary, but, wrath could be in unjust anger in many different ways. It could manifest, against one's parents, against one's spouse, against one's children, against a criminal. Wrath could be disorder, just like all of them can split into many disorders. So they get more and more specific as they go down. But these are the main categories that one has to watch out for. Remember, too, that they are habits, that these are habitual dispositions. So you can't commit a sloth. You can commit an act that is slothful, or an act born of sloth. But sloth itself describes the habit within you. And finally, let's remember that the point of learning about vice at all is not to be afraid of it, not to be impressed by all of the ways in which humanity can go wrong, or all the things the devil can tempt us with. The point of learning about vice is to learn what to watch out for. And of course, you can't learn about every individual thing, but as we're going towards our final end, our highest good, who is God, it's important to notice the major ways that the devil can pervert or distract us from getting there. And of course, it's not all the devil too. It's our cooperation, our flesh, our sinful, fallen will that often looks at something and values it above God. Again, that's the key to discerning the disorder in all of these, right? Having confidence in yourself, or thinking that you are good at something, recognizing that you're smart or a great piano player or whatever, that's not prideful. Pride is the disordered overestimation of your own excellence, right? So that your pride, your happiness with yourself supersedes your desire to get to God, clouds that, and it becomes an end for you, right? Rather, it starts to replace your final end, which is God. Same for all of these other 6, right? So other people have good things. The things that they have aren't bad. It's the disorder of envy, which says, man, to have what they have, that's what I want with my life. So it's sort of like you're a ship, right? And if you're going to a specific destination, the summum bonum, if you have a telos, a purpose, and you're trying to get there, there can be all of these ways which you could majorly founder. You could crash, you could sink on all of these shoals, all of these danger points. But that doesn't mean that you can't go sailing. You have to go somewhere. You have to set your final end on something. So you're going to pick. It might be material wealth. It might be pleasure of lust or food or drink or whatever. But you're going to have a final end. So might as well get it right. Might as well find the highest good, the infinite true, the infinite good, the perfect fellowship of love, which is God, for which you were made. So we learn about vice, but we remember, how do you resist vice? How do you resist evil? St. Thomas reminds us, well, there are 2 ways. First, by turning your will against it and inculcating virtuous habits within your life. So, for example, if I have a problem with gluttony, I might not only stop eating in excess and set that as my goal, I might sometimes say no even to just foods that I like, that I could potentially eat in moderate amounts, just to teach myself, to build a habit of saying no to myself. I heard a priest one time who said earlier in his life, when he had a problem with lust, one thing he did to combat it was just instead of taking long hot showers in the morning, which he liked, you warm yourself up, you relax, you sing in the shower, etc. He said, from then on, I took cold showers, and for no more than 3 minutes in the morning. So there's nothing wrong with showers, but I took something away from myself to incubate a good habit in myself of saying, no, you can't have whatever you want in the moment. That might seem like freedom, but it's actually slavery to the lower passions, to the lower desires. So that's one way, incubating good habits within yourself. But the other way is just, let's remember, we must rely on God's grace. If we're disconnected from prayer, if we're disconnected from the Holy Spirit, and all of this theology becomes an academic exercise. And we can name all the virtues and all the vices, all of their daughters and sub-virtues, and etc. We could do that all day long. But at the end of the day, our telos, our final end, is not some cold, inanimate object that we're trying to get to, or some obscure ideology. It's a person. It is God. There are 3 persons in that Trinity, and they're characterized by their love for us. And so God loves you, and he wants to draw you to himself. So what a crippling journey it would be without asking for his grace and his help. So those are the 7 major virtues, the 7 capital sins under our belt. In our next lesson, we'll move on to discuss law and freedom.